An Apache teacher lost everything in the storm, until a rancher saved her. The wind didn't just blow across the Arizona high desert. It bit. It was a cruel, scouring thing that carried the scent of coming snow and the lonely whistle of a train that had already disappeared into the dark. Kaya sat on a splintered wooden bench at the edge of the platform, her fingers numb inside her thin wool gloves. She clutched the handle of her single valise as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. She was 30 years old, a woman of sharp intellect and a soul forged in the fires of two different worlds, yet at this moment she felt like a ghost. 10 years ago she had walked away from the flickering lodge fires of her people. Her parents were gone, taken by a fever that didn't care for lineage, and the Chiricahua Mountains had begun to feel like a graveyard. She had a mind that craved the logic of books and the rhythm of poetry. She had worked, studied, and bled for her education, eventually becoming a teacher whose reputation for brilliance was whispered about in every schoolhouse from Tucson to Flagstaff. But brilliance was no shield against hate. The teachers at the academy in town had been a chorus of envy. They hated the way the children hung on her every word. They hated how she could solve equations they couldn't grasp and recite Keats with a voice like honey. When they discovered the truth that the dark-complexioned Spanish lady was in fact Apache, the jealousy turned into a weapon. They didn't just fire her, they drove her out. A mob, fueled by the very ignorance she had tried to cure, had escorted her to the station. "Go back to the scrub, Apache," they had jeered, but there was no back for Kaya. She was a woman of the middle ground, too educated for the old ways, too savage for the new. The station was empty now, save for the flickering oil lamp and the howling wind. She shivered violently, her breath coming in ragged puffs of white. "The last eastbound's been gone 20 minutes, man, and the station master's locked up tight for the night." The voice was deep, like the low rumble of a distant rock slide. Kaya didn't look up. She tightened her grip on her bag. "I am aware," she said, her voice clipped and precise. A man stepped into the circle of light. He was tall, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat, and his Stetson pulled low. He had just walked back from the tracks after seeing his younger brother onto the train. He stood a few feet away, his spurs jingling softly as he shifted his weight. This was Pat, a man whose name was synonymous with the valley's richest cattle range, and whose eyes carried the heavy shadow of a widower. "You're gonna freeze right to that bench if you sit there much longer," Pat said. "It's fixin' to drop below zero before midnight." "I am waiting for the morning stage," Kaya replied, her chin tilted high despite her chattering teeth. "Stage don't run till Tuesday." Wheel broke on the pass. Pat took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "I don't mean to be forward, but a lady alone at this hour. Well, the desert don't have much mercy." Kaya finally looked at him. Her dark eyes were fierce, even in her exhaustion. "I do not talk to strangers, sir. I have had quite enough of civilized men for one lifetime." Pat didn't flinch. He looked at her thin coat, then at the proud set of her shoulders. He'd heard the talk in town today. He knew who she was, the teacher they'd run out on a rail, because they were scared of a woman who knew more than they did. "I reckon you've got every right to be prickly," Pat said softly, his voice losing its edge. "The folks in that town, they act like they're God's gift to the frontier, but they wouldn't know grace if it bit 'em on the heel. But look at me, man. I lost my wife 3 winters back to the lungs. I spent a lot of nights alone in a big house listening to the wind. I know what it's like to have the world turn its back and leave you out in the cold." He took off his glove and reached out, not to touch her, but to gesture toward the horizon. "My name's Pat. I run the Circle P. I'm a widower, a rancher, and right now just a man who can't in good conscience leave a soul to die on a wooden bench. I ain't looking to be a stranger. I'm looking to be a neighbor. And the way I see it, the stars don't care about the blood in your veins, and neither do I. They just see a person who's cold." Kaya looked at his hand. Rough, calloused, but steady. Something in his words, the acknowledgement of his own loneliness, pierced through her armor. The ice around her heart didn't melt, but it cracked. "Kaya," she whispered. "Well, Miss Kaya," Pat said, offering a small, sad smile. "My buckboard's right over there. My housekeeper, Mrs. Miller, is probably keeping the stove hot. Let's get you out of this wind." The ride to the ranch was silent, save for the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves on the hard-packed earth. Pat wrapped a heavy buffalo robe around her, and for the first time in hours, Kaya felt the prickle of returning warmth. The ranch house was a sprawling structure of stone and timber, glowing like a beacon in the dark. Inside, the air smelled of cedar smoke and dried herbs. Pat led her straight to the great hearth, where a fire roared with a ferocity that defied the winter. "Sit," he commanded gently. Within minutes, he returned with a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee and a bowl of thick beef soup. He didn't hover. He sat in a leather chair across from her, cleaning a piece of tack, giving her the space to simply exist. Kaya ate with trembling hands. The warmth of the soup felt like life returning to her limbs. She looked around the room. It was a man's house, but there were shelves lined with books. Shakespeare, histories, legal texts. "You read these?" she asked, her voice rasping. Pat looked up. "My wife did. She was a schoolmarm back in Missouri. I try to get through them, but my brain's more suited for counting head of cattle than deciphering poetry. I kept them, though. Felt wrong to let him go." Kaya set her bowl down. "I'll leave by a day or two. As soon as the stage is repaired. I have nowhere specific to go, but I cannot stay where I am not wanted." Pat set his leather work aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Now don't go jumping the fence before you see the pasture. I've been thinking. My ranch hands the folks work in the valley. The family's out on the edge. Their kids are growing up wild as local weed. They can't read a brand, let alone a book. The town school won't take them because they're ranch trash or half-breeds, or just plain poor." He paused, watching her. "I got a big outbuilding, solid stone, used to be a bunkhouse. I got the money to turn it into the finest schoolroom in the territory. You stay here, you teach those kids. I'll pay you a proper wage and you'll have a roof that no one can take from you. You earn your living, and you give those children a chance to be something more than just dirt movers." Kaya's eyes widened. "You would trust me, after what the town said?" Pat's expression turned grim. "Miss Kaya, I've lived long enough to know that the loudest voices in a mob are usually the ones with the emptiest heads. You're a genius, or so the whispers say. And I reckon a genius teacher is exactly what these desert rats need." Kaya looked into the fire. She thought of the 10 years she had spent proving herself, only to be cast out. She thought of her tribe, of the stories her mother told her about the wind being a teacher. "I won't teach like the others," she said softly. "I will teach them the books, yes, but I will teach them the land too. I will teach them that every soul has a history." "I wouldn't expect nothing less," Pat replied. The months that followed were a whirlwind of dust, ink, and change. The stone schoolhouse, as it came to be known, became a legend. Pat was a man of his word. He hauled in desks, slates, and crates of books from San Francisco. At first the parents were hesitant. They saw a woman with copper skin and sharp eyes, but then they saw their children. They saw little Tommy Miller, who had never uttered a word, suddenly reciting the preamble to the Constitution. They saw the children of the Mexican laborers and the poor homesteaders sitting side by side, learning that the world was larger than a dry patch of dirt. Kaya was a revelation. She didn't just teach, she ignited. She was firm but infinitely patient. Her brilliance, cutting through the fog of their poverty. And every evening when the sun dipped below the mesas and painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, Pat would be there. Sometimes he'd bring a repaired chair. Sometimes he'd just bring himself. They would sit on the porch of the schoolhouse, the rancher and the teacher, watching the shadows grow long. "They love you, you know," Pat said one evening, a year after that night at the station. "The kids, the parents, even some of those folks in town are starting to look mighty ashamed of themselves." Kaya smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I found my tribe, Pat. It just looks a little different than I imagined. Pat stood up and walked to the railing. He looked out over the land he owned, then back at the woman who had filled the silence of his home with the sound of thinking. "Kaya," he said, his voice husky. "I ain't a man of many fancy words. I leave that to you and Mr. Shakespeare. But that house of mine, it was a tomb before you showed up, and I've spent a year watching you build a world out of nothing. I don't want you to just be the teacher of this valley. I want you to be the heart of my home." Kaya stood and walked to him. The winter was coming again, but she didn't shiver. The frontier was a hard place, a place that broke the weak and hardened the strong. But it was also a place where a new story could be written on a blank horizon. "I am an Apache woman, Pat," she said softly. "And I am a woman of books. I am both, and I will never choose one over the other." Pat took her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles that had once been blue with cold. "I wouldn't have you any other way. I reckon we're both a bit of a bridge between what was and what's gonna be." Under the vast, unblinking Arizona stars, the rich rancher and the genius teacher stood together. They were married in the stone schoolhouse, with 50 children as their witnesses and the desert wind as their choir. Kaya never forgot the freezing station, or the jealousy of the small-minded. But whenever she looked at the rows of children in her classroom, the poor, the forgotten, the brilliant, she knew she hadn't just survived, she had conquered. And in the warmth of Pat's hearth, she finally found the one thing no book could ever fully describe: a place where she belonged.
If you enjoy our Western stories, consider subscribing. It really helps us keep creating more for you.